Hello, you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to kind of try and help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Thinking about anything. And last time we left off, we were talking about, hypothetical deductive reasoning, and we're going to take back up on evaluating Piaget's theory. Piaget's influence on the field of development psychology has been compared with Shakespeare's influence on English literature and Aristotle's influence on philosophy. So if you know who Shakespeare is, which I'm guessing you probably do, and you know who Aristotle is, which you might, I knew, but some people I've heard, who is that? But anyway, he's pretty influential in this science. His theory has pinpointed the way to countless avenues of investigation and continues to do so. Piaget's theory also has had an enormous influence on education. It has given parents and teachers benchmarks for what to expect, roughly, at various ages, and has helped educators design curriculum appropriate to children's level of development. So he was the first guy to kind of do that. It's like, well, you expect this from this age kid and this from this age kid. And the ages themselves are not that important. It's the milestones, the progression, that they go on to become the little people and then the adults that they become. So, he was the first guy to kind of map that, chart that out, give it a rough outline, so that people kind of knew, that everybody didn't have random ways of becoming. Although research has not seriously challenged the overall sequence of development Piaget described, it has questioned his assertion of definite stages of development, because everyone develops differently. Not all kids are the same. If you have more than one kid, you understand they are not all the same. And some people go this way faster, some people go that way faster. It's just everybody's different. So, there's not always the specific. Now, normally there is on average, but, people do vary. His own writings provide many examples of children displaying aspects of scientific thinking well before adolescence. So there are kids who are a little more on the ball and they can grasp these concepts before they get to be a teenager. At the same time, Piaget seems to have overestimated some older children's abilities, because again, everybody develops differently, so not all older kids are capable of, deductive reasoning. In most of his writings, he paid little attention to individual differences, to variations in a child's performance of different kinds of tasks, or to social and cultural influences. So, he didn't take those things into account. He failed to adequately take into account the gradual accumulation of knowledge and expertise in specific fields and the role of metacognition, awareness and monitoring of one's own mental processes and strategies, because that's important to have in order to be capable of higher thinking. If you're not aware of your thinking, then that's a problem, because you're not going to know what you're thinking about, or how you go about thinking. Neo-Piagetian research suggests that children's cognitive processes are closely tied to specific content, what a child is thinking about, as well as to the context of a problem and the kinds of information and thought a culture considers important. Remember, like we were talking about the other day, if that's not important in your culture, then you're probably not going to worry about it. Although Piaget described the stage of formal operations as the pinnacle of cognitive achievement, other researchers suggest that the developmental changes in cognition extend well into adulthood. And they do, because you're always learning if you let yourself. There are ignorant people who don't let themselves learn and grow. But you're always learning and growing if you let yourself. And that's how you become a fully developed person. Such aspects of mature intelligence as the role of experience and intuition and the wisdom that helps people cope with an often chaotic world are learned. So you learn what you live. So if these are not, higher thinking, deductive reasoning, and not something that you've learned, then you're probably not going to have it. And that's why some people are more, I don't like using the word ignorant, but there's not a really better word, than other people. Because it just wasn't part of their world. Language development. Although school-age children are quite proficient in use of language, adolescence brings further refinements. So adolescence is a period of tweaking, and I don't mean the drug kind, don't be doing that. I mean the kind where you're fine-tuning your skills that you learned as a child. Vocabulary continues to grow as reading matter becomes more adult. Because as a teenager, we're more interested in things, that adults are doing. And we feel like we're becoming an adult, so we should be doing these things too, So, our interests become more adult-like. Although individual differences are great, by ages 16 to 18, the average young person knows about 80,000 words. So from the time you're a baby and you knew none to the time, you're about 18, you know about 80,000 words. I guess those vocabulary words were helpful. With the advent of formal thought, adolescents can define and discuss such abstractions as love, justice, and freedom. Because before that, the kid just took whoever authority figure was in their life, told them about these things. Now, when you come into adolescence, you can think about these things and what does this mean to you? And some of my life coaching clients, I had to kind of coach through this because they had never thought about what things meant to them. They were still going on what they were taught and what society at large says is a thing. And one of the things about, we talked to people who are in bad relationships, what does love look like to you? And you had to chart that out. And when me and my husband were getting together, and I said, if you want to get with me, you got to go to couples therapy. And he did. So that's one of the things. What does love look like to you? You describe what a loving relationship looks like to you. And then you share that with your partner, and they share theirs with you. So because like I said, you can love each other and may not know how to love each other. Because I know our parents, we didn't have the best examples on how to love each other. So, we learned how to do it right. They more frequently use such terms as however, otherwise, anyway, therefore, really, and probably to express logical relations between clauses or sentences. Because they're starting to figure out that, there are differences and you can compare things, and so they're kind of putting these words into the vocabulary and comparing thoughts and thinking about things more. They become more conscious of words as symbols that can have multiple meanings. They enjoy using irony, puns, and metaphors. And if you think about that, that was about the time, where your sarcasm also comes into play. Adolescents also become more skilled in social perspective taking, the ability to understand another person's point of view and level of knowledge, and to speak accordingly. And some people never develop this, and that's sad. And it could be a mental problem or just they're not developed enough as a person. But some people never take other people's points of view in account. It's all or nothing with them. And that's a shame because we're all different. We all have something to contribute to the world. And if you get other people's points of view, you learn a little bit more. and understand a little bit more. So being ignorant is not good for you or for anyone else. And if you know someone is not as developed as you, I've talked with some intellectual people who, even if their audience is not on the same level as them, they speak to them as if they are. And it's like you can't go into a factory and speak to the people the same way you speak to the PhDs at the college, because they're not going to get your drift, because that's above their knowledge base. So, if you're talking to someone who, is not on your level, put it to them in words they can understand. You wouldn't talk to a 2-year-old the same way you would talk to your doctor, because the 2-year-olds just be like, or your doctor might be insulted that you're talking to them like a 2-year-old. But, this ability is essential in order to persuade or just to engage in conversation with adults. Because you should be able to have an adult conversation, some give and take, some comparison, some, gathering of information, and that's how, we make friends and get along. So that's an important skill. Teenage slang is part of the process of developing an independent identity separate from parents and the adult world. And if you remember when we were teenagers, I'm sure you remember the slang that we used back in the day. I was in high school the first half of the 80s, so, things were totally tubular and awesome, and, things like that. In creating such expressions as awesome and geek, young people use their newfound ability to play with words to define their generation's unique take on values, tastes, and preferences. So this is an inclusion thing that they do when they start using this slang. And they wouldn't be included in, they have a generational identity. And this has to do with, basically everything that's going on in the world at that point in time that they are teenagers in. And that's why we remember the most and the best about when we were teenagers, because it made such an indelible mark on our psyche, because we were becoming a part of the world. Elkind, Immature Characteristics of Adolescent Thought. We have seen how children develop from egocentric beings whose interests extends not much beyond the nipple to persons able to solve abstract problems and imagine ideal societies. Yet in some ways, adolescents' thinking seems strangely immature. And if you've had teenagers, that's the case. The thinking, they're growing up, the body's tall, generally they're okay, but some of their ideas are not quite there yet. They may be rude to adults. They may have trouble making up their minds what to wear each day. And they often act as if the whole world revolved around them. And, in teenage years, because they are trying to become an adult and they're so immersed in their evolution as a person, they kind of go back emotionally to where they were when they were little kids. It's all about me. According to the psychologist David Elkind, such behavior stems from adolescents' inexperienced ventures into former operational thought. So even though they're an adolescent now, they are inexperienced in thinking like an adult. This new way of thinking, which fundamentally transforms the way they look at themselves and their world, is as unfamiliar to them as their reshaped bodies, and they sometimes feel just as awkward in its use. So they're not only feeling physically awkward, they're feeling mentally awkward. Teenage years were not fun for us, were they? As they try out their new powers, they may, gosh, my tongue today. They may sometimes stumble, like an infant learning to walk. Well, I'm not a teenager, but I did have a stroke, so that's my problem. This immaturity of thinking manifests itself in at least 6 characteristic ways, according to Elkind. Number 1, idealism and criticalness. As adolescents envision an ideal world, they realize how far the real world, for which they hold adults responsible, falls short by comparison. They become super conscious of hypocrisy, and with their sharpened verbal reasoning, they relish magazines and entertainers that attack public figures with satire and parody. They are convinced that they know better than adults how to run the world, and they frequently find fault with their parents. Yes. Yes, they do. I remember those days, and I remember when my kids were going through those days. Because you have this new world you've come into, and here's how you think it should go, but it's really going like this, and you're just not super happy about that. Argumentativeness. Oh, yes. Adolescents are constantly looking for opportunities to try out and show off their newfound formal reasoning abilities. They often become argumentative as they marshal facts and logic to build a case for, say, staying out late. I think we all remember. Indecisiveness. Adolescents can keep many alternatives in mind at the same time, but because of their inexperience, they lack effective strategies for choosing among them. Thus, they may have trouble making up their minds even about such a simple thing as what to wear. So, it's a struggle. Apparent hypocrisy. Young adolescents often do not recognize the difference between expressing an ideal and making the sacrifices necessary to live up to it. So they have this ideal view of the world and how things should be, but they don't have the experience necessary to make the world how they think it should be. So in their mind, this is kind of a problem. So they can appear like they're for one thing, but then later on they change their mind because, they don't know what to do about it. In one example, Elkind gives teenagers concerned about animal welfare, they demonstrated in front of a furrier shop, but waited until a warm spring day to do it, thus avoiding having to stand outside in cloth coats in winter weather. To an adult observer, this behavior might seem hypocritical, but actually, these earnest young people did not realize the connection between their behavior and the ideal they were advocating. So, that's teenage thinking for you. We're going to protest these fur coats, but let's do it on a warm day so we don't have to stand out in the cold. That's their thought process. When they didn't realize we're standing out in the cold in our cloth coats to show you shouldn't be wearing the fur. You still be warm in a nice cloth coat. Self-consciousness. Adolescents now can think about thinking, their own and other people's. So we're thinking about thinking. How we think is the way we think, how other people think, and why do some people think this way? Because it's so very different from the way we think. And is there anything wrong with the way we're thinking? So adolescents are kind of preoccupied with thought. However, in their preoccupation with their own mental state, adolescents often assume that everyone else is thinking about the same thing they are thinking about, themselves. A teenage girl may be mortified if she wears the wrong thing to a party, thinking that everyone else must be looking askance at her, and teenage girls are bad about that, and it's like I said, they don't understand the self-fulfilling prophecy, that they're looking at everybody oddly because they're afraid everybody's looking at them, and then everybody sees them looking oddly, so then they are looking at them. Elkind refers to this self-consciousness as the imaginary audience, a conceptualized observer who is as concerned with a young person's thoughts and behaviors as he or she is. So, that's kind of a thing that we go through, is a paranoid phase like that, that we think everybody's worrying about us, watching us, judging us, being critical of us, and, hopefully you outgrow that. There are some people who just don't outgrow that because they got a paranoid nature. But for the most part, you outgrow that, thank goodness. So you ain't worried that everybody thinks whatever about you. Because, the saying goes, it's none of my business what people think about me. The imaginary audience, says Elkind, is thoughts and behaviors, especially strong in the early teens, but persist to a lesser degree into adult life. And that's most of the time. Like I said, there are some adults who they carry that on into their life and go paranoid routes, and that's a shame. It may surface when, for example, a person drops a fork in the tile floor of a noisy restaurant and imagines that everyone in the room is watching, like the E.F. Hutton commercial. Specialness and invulnerability. Elkind uses the term personal fable to denote a belief by adolescents that they are special, that their experience is unique, and that they are not subject to the rules that govern the rest of the world. Now, you are special and unique. Everyone is. But teenagers kind of have this, magical, impervious to any harm attitude that is definitely not the truth. And they think that the rules that govern the world don't necessarily apply to them. And I've met a young person who, oh gosh, they're still very into the people they watched on television in childhood, and they go to these, conventions and things to be near these people, and think that these people are their friends. And now, to a certain extent, because they've seen each other so much, they do know each other. But otherwise, these people have a completely separate life away from this person that they don't really know anything about. So that's kind of magical thinking. It's, sometimes that's what they call, the personal fable, the magical thinking that hopefully you outgrow. Because the world is not magical. There's a magic in it. It's, God's magic runs through the world, and you have to believe in that, and that'll help. But you're not a prince or a princess, and you're not going to have the happy ending unless you make it. No one's going to drop that in your lap. Sorry. Other people get hooked on taking drugs, not me. Or no one has ever been as deeply in love as I have, are things that, these teenagers, believe when they say these things, According to Elkind, this special form of egocentrism underlies much risky, self-destructive behavior, because they believe, that's not going to happen to me, and unfortunately my sister died in a accident where she was hit by a car on a bike, and that's one of the things she said when she was in the hospital, is like, I thought that happened to other kids. I didn't think that would ever happen to me, and she was 12, so, Like the imaginary audience, the personal fable continues into adulthood sometimes. So sometimes grown-ups still got this going on. I'm sure we've all met those grown-up, princesses and princes that, are very egocentrical. Without such a belief, people would become hermits, constantly shielding themselves from the real dangers of contemporary life. So it can help you a little bit if you, realize your specialness, and everything, but you also have to live in the real world. Life is all about balance. Everything is all about balance. You can't tip too far one way or the other, or that becomes problematic for you. You got to keep your balance as you go through things. Excuse me. The concepts of the imaginary audience and the personal fable have been widely accepted, but their validity as distinct earmarks of adolescence has little independent research support, because, what teenager wants to participate in that study? In some studies of the personal fable, adolescents were more likely than college students or adults to see themselves as vulnerable to certain risks, such as alcohol and other drug problems, rather than less likely, as the personal fable would predict. And that also can be because teenagers are more insecure. They're more worried about stuff happening to them. Rather than universal features of adolescents' cognitive development, it has been suggested that the imaginary audience and personal fable may be related to specific social experiences. So, if the child was supported as, being wonderful and special and all that sort of thing, then they might feel that way. Whereas a child who was not treated that way probably would not come out that way. Or a child who is judged as critical, and everything was nitpicked on, might, have more of that, imaginary audience thing going on, because they are worried that everybody's watching them and judging them. And since these concepts grew out of Elkind's clinical observations, they may be more characteristic of youngsters who are experiencing difficulties in adjustment. Because remember, he was a psychologist. He was talking to kids who were going to see a psychologist. So, more of his kids might have had problems with these things running into adulthood than on average. Moral reasoning, Kohlberg's theory. A woman is near death from cancer. A druggist has discovered a drug that doctors believe might save her. The druggist is charging $2,000 for a small dose, 10 times what the drug costs him to make. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, borrows from everyone he knows, but can scrape together only $1,000. He begs the druggist to sell him the drug for $1,000 or let him pay the rest later. The druggist refuses, saying, "I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." Heinz, desperate, breaks into the man's store and steals the drug that night. Should Heinz have done that? Why or why not? And, you can discuss that with yourself and decide which you think it should be. Heinz's problem is the most famous example of Lawrence Kohlberg's approach to studying moral development. Starting in the 1950s, Kohlberg and his colleagues posed hypothetical dilemmas like this one to 75 boys ages 10, 13, and 16, and continued to question them periodically for more than 30 years. So this guy was studying this moral development for more than 30 years. Some people may say, get a life, but that was his life. At the heart of each dilemma was the concept of justice. By asking respondents how they arrived at their answers, Kohlberg concluded that the way people look at moral issues reflects cognitive development. Kohlberg described 3 levels of moral reasoning, each divided into 2 stages. Level 1, preconventional morality. People act under external controls. They obey rules to avoid punishment or reap rewards, or act out of self-interest. This level is typical of children ages 4 to 10. Level 2, conventional morality, or morality of conventional role conformity. People have internalized the standards of authority figures. They are concerned about being good, pleasing others, and maintaining the social order. This level is typically reached after age 10. Many people never move beyond it, even in adulthood. And you know, the military likes those people because you're worried about being good, pleasing others, maintaining the social order, taking orders. Level 3, Postconventional morality, or morality of autonomous moral principles. People now recognize conflicts between moral standards and make their own judgments on the basis of principles of right, fairness, and justice. People generally do not reach this level of moral reasoning until at least early adolescence, or more commonly in young adulthood, if ever. So this level 3 post-conventional morality is a higher stage of morality that some people never go to because they have to recognize that there are conflicts in belief systems. And for some people that's hard. Their belief system is all or nothing. There's no wiggle room. And you know that what's right to one person might not be right to another person. And you know what's fair to one and just to another might not be the same for everybody because of their experience in the world. So you have to be able to see that in order to reach this level. So a lot of people, you know, their moral reasoning is not to that point. It's still, boop, this is what so-and-so said, this is what my parents said, this is what, you know, my teacher said, this is what we do here in our culture, and that's as far as they get. They never go beyond that because there's no wiggle room in their belief system. And when you mature to this post-conventional level, you realize life is wiggle room. We live in a big world, a big universe, and not everybody's the same. Not everybody came up the same. Not everybody's experience is the same. Not everybody's point of view is the same. So a lot of people don't get to this point. And that's where I'm going to leave you for now. Hopefully that help you figure out my tongue today, though. A little bit more about why you do what you do. And please like this and share so we can spread this educational program around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you want to help me out even more, go onto my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.